Hello everyone. Welcome to our first stream for Shiver Corporate. So today we're going to be talking about our influences and inspirations for the project. Here I've got the project lead for Shiver Corporate. It's kind of sole writer, Adam Holloway. Would you like to introduce yourself, Adam?
Hi, I'm Adam. I am everything he just said. I was the narrative writer for Slasher and Blockbuster, and I guess Classified as well would be the one where we kind of just batted the ball back and forth a bit for a while. But yeah, this is the first Shiver book I've kind of taken from scratch. So I'm sorry about that.
Is something that we probably learned for the amount of streams that we're going to do is that Adam will bag on his own work when he really shouldn't, because it's extremely funny and great. We've also known each other for a very long time now. So we were at film school together, and have been kind of working on various things for different corporations as well together, who should not be named, but will probably pop up in this chat at some point, I imagine. So yeah, we've been working together and doing things together for quite a long time. But yeah, so streaming. So this is something we're kind of starting out and playing around with a little bit more. If this is something you want to see more of, please let us know. Like, kind of drop us a comment, jump in the chat. Like, let us know if this is something that you, as our audience and as people who play Shiver, really enjoy. Because if you enjoy it, then we'll happily do more of it. Because me and Adam can talk about stuff that we like and inspires us until the cows come home, to be perfectly honest. So yeah. So I guess, Adam, where do you want to start in terms of like us talking about where this book came from? Because it's an interesting point, really, of kind of like I think of how it kind of got started.
Yeah, I think the strange thing that you and I weirdly have realized really late in the development process for it, because to be clear, I think to some degree with people, pretty much every adventure and case file for the book, all elements that comprise the narrative, kind of the bulk of it and the lore and all of that is done to some degree. It's might need more testing, but we'll see. So like we've only just very recently realized how kind of um, how long like Cornwell has been a part of the Shiver world. Because I think between you and I, and definitely from the way we've talked to people about it before at conventions and in person, is we always kind of talk about Lance, which is our Shiver's in-universe good guys and clandestine, secret agents fighting all the weird, nasty things. And I think both of us were kind of laboring under this, as it turns out, delusion, that Lance were in the core rulebook and that Lance were in the cursed library, or at least in one or the other. And we realized, I think, like last week, that it wasn't Lance that was kind of our first recurring feature. It was not the good guys. It was Cornwell, who appear in the core rulebook in the first Shiver adventure we published, which might have been like the third or fourth one you wrote. I
I
mean, correct
think
me if
so.
I'm wrong on
Yeah.
that.
So the first one I wrote was definitely the Lost Ship, for
Yeah,
sure. Um, which does actually factor into Cornwall because they get tied into it a lot later with the classified books, which
yeah.
is,
Even
is interesting.
retrospectively, they
They
get brought in partially
more and more.
responsible.
But yeah, no, it's the kind of quick start adventure that we have in the back of the core rulebook, Corporate Risers, very
Mhm.
much I think was a big tone setter for where we started to go with Cornwell, how they got looped into kind of other adventures as well. I mean, they even pop up in the Cursed Library a couple of times as well. They pop up in I think they pop up in Dark Prospects. I think I make it a suggestion that the one of the people could be a Cornwell who wants you to get the alien sample from a mine.
Yeah, in
Of
the
just
Weird West, the
yeah,
1800s. Yeah,
mm,
Cornwell ancestry. Yeah.
mm.
But yeah, I mean, as it turned out, Lance first appeared officially in print in Slasher, which I think I included one of their agents as like a fun little Easter egg specifically for you because I was like, oh yeah, now it's part of the Lance canon. Didn't even think it was technically the start of our Lance publishing history. because they've been so present in home games. But no, Cornwell was the first ever Shiver game I play tested, I think. I played the mailroom clerk. I made her entirely obsessed with noir movies. And we had this weird little eclectic group of characters all working in this huge mega corporation. Basically just compressed right down to the bottom of it, and this weird little ecosystem that formed. And I think from that point onwards, like that, I was really fascinated with this weird little self-contained world of Cornwell, and just how much mischief and mayhem you can get away with when they are not just the bad guy, but like when it's entirely their own world. So the first ever Cornwall adventure, which is the one that accidentally started this book, I wrote for fun when we needed a Patreon installment. And you were so, I mean, Charlie does, for people who don't know, Charlie does mechanical design, he does narrative writing, he designs other games under the Parable umbrella, but he also does all of our layout. And sometimes he does art, but art is mostly Ben for the Shiver world, but Charlie does all the layout for the book design, and that is a huge undertaking. There's a reason people don't usually do as many jobs as Charlie does. So when we were doing the Patreon and also doing Slasher and Blockbuster, and I think maybe some tail end of Gothic, he didn't have time to kind of set a narrative structure for whatever the next month's Patreon installment would be. So I just thought it'd be cool if we could do a thing, like a monster or an item or something weird and sci-fi tied to Cornwell that can be a thing that they keep in one of their research facilities, and kind of tie a loose adventure around that, using the same kind of comic tone that we brought to the first time we play tested Corporate Rises from the original core book. And what came out of that was Alien Autopsy Gone Wrong, which was a very literal title, which is an alien that Cornwell doesn't care about, is in its research facility, and it trusts its interns to kind of, because it's not going to turn a profit, to cut it open and document whatever they find, but they don't really care. I think the tagline in the briefing for that is, remember, if it was important, it wouldn't be on your desk. And that was kind of the tone of the whole thing, like these people that are not trusted in charge of something entirely, in this case literally alien, from a mega corporation that really doesn't care if they live or die. And I thought that would kind of be the end of it. We'd do this one installment, it'd be a PDF, we could probably give it out with like a free quick start file, and I think it just kind of tickled people in the right way. I don't know how you remember.
I think
how you remember receiving
it tickled people in the right way. I found it immensely funny. The other, I think, big litmus test is that it made Barney, so my brother and one of the directors of the company as well, our business director, really chuckle. I think dark corporate humor is something he kind of really gels with. Like, I think he finds it very funny. And it was also, I think, I remember it kind of coming out at the time and then chatting to people about it at conventions as well, of just like, I don't think we'd realised fully how much people liked Cornwell as a villain, like as a go-to villain, and how much it was being used. I think that actually made us go, oh, actually, that's a part of our kind of, I will be fair to say it, very loose world building that we tend to do with Shiver, because we don't like to put, hard world constraints on things in particular, because ultimately we want you to make your own horror movies. But we just like having returnable things that are steadfast and work really well. And Cornwell's always been a really returnable villain. Lance has always been for us in the same way. And as Adam said, it was something that we didn't realise that, but I just used Lance a lot when playtesting, because it is just a really good setup for why your players are going towards danger or going towards the weird thing. And I think it was for both, we didn't realise how popular they were with our audience until we started putting out stuff that was more specific to them, Cornwell in particular.
Yeah, it's been good to see that kind of returning joy for things. For what I said, because Shiver is an infinite toolbox for all kind of things. So as Charlie said, like, we do not like to dictate the narrative world. Like, Charlie and I had a very long discussion when Slasher and Gothic were kind of coming to fruition about, does does everything fit in the Gothic world now? Is slasher set in the modern day version of Gothic? And I think we were both. I remember saying, like, no one cares about a man with a knife when your gym teacher's a vampire. And so we have this kind of like these self-contained bubbles, and I think Lance and Cornwell really do. They don't kind of dictate a world. They give people more toolboxes to play with. It's like, oh, do you need like a cardboard cutout ready to pull out of the box for your secret good guys, or your secret villainous multi-billion corporation? And it's good to have that. Do you wanna should we move on to talk about some influences? Because I think we're here to recommend people movies, which as ex-film students is obviously the only thing we're qualified to do.
Yes, absolutely, and we're spiraling towards the philosophical. So yes. So where do we want to start? Do we want to start with films first?
I maybe we start with games, because I saw
Yeah.
some of your notes, and I think we've kind of veered very close into a couple of interesting topics there.
Okay,
So
yeah,
there's an obvious one, isn't there? I think.
Oh, see. To me, a few of those are obvious, like in my brain.
Okay,
But yeah,
you go ahead. You go ahead. Throw the first ball.
yeah. So I think in terms of when we're looking at the actual setup of Cornwell itself, and this kind of being this large, very unwieldy mega corporation that's kind of exploiting people at its core to conduct experiments, conduct research. Really, the Portal games are the ones that first come to mind for me, with Aperture Science. In particular for me, I think one of the things that reset the tone, I think when we were talking about it, in Portal 2, for those of those who are not au fait with Portal, just to think, it is a game where you are a test subject with a portal gun, where you can make portals and you have to use it to puzzle your way through dangerous and deadly levels. And there is a big old AI robot that wants you to die, that is kind of making these rooms harder and more dangerous as you go through. There is a section in the second game where you discover the 1950s iteration of this test facility, where you fall through a floor, and you discover the head of Aperture Science, who is Cave Johnson, voiced beautifully by J.K. Simmons, and it just and a lot of the stuff actually that you don't see is kind of, I think, a big influence for this. If he starts talking about the time people got mutated into mantids or X or Y, and a lot of the other experiments that fall outside the portal technology that they were up to for a while before that era of Aperture Science kind of got shut down. And it really tickled my brain of thinking more outside the box, of being like, okay, really, we're only seeing Aperture Science through the view of a test subject testing a very specific thing. What else could be going on? And how many other things could you kind of throw it at? And it's just that sense of humour, I think, bleeds in very, very well.
Yeah, I think when it comes to Portal, it is very much a predecessor. And you reminded me, because throughout this entire process, obviously the safety squirrel is Cornwell's budget nanny for the intern led facilities, which is any facility that is over 60% staffed by interns who are unpaid and therefore have no value. It is considered safe to have the highly untested AI, the safety squirrel, kind of operating, and in theory in charge of keeping everything safe. And thinking back, GLaDOS, which is the AI they use in Portal, it was a very... I remember that being like a big draw to the game, was the personality and humor of that kind of omnipotent monster, who obviously that gets to sing a song over the end credits, all about cake. Wonderful game. And as well, I think we did actually have a conversation one point about whether or not we should have one of the departments be kind of interdimensional travel, and how do we play with that. And I think neither of us just wanted to homage Portal that directly. But it was definitely a defining thing as well. The other joy of Aperture Science is the sister company, if you've never played Half-Life, Black Mesa. is kind of the more prestigious version of them. There's a lot of kind of like, they both get government contracts, but Aperture Science get the government contracts that are significantly cheaper because they have no safety protocols compared to Black Mesa, who also, great catastrophes. But I liked the almost slap it together and lethal testing of Aperture Science is definitely a kind of the heart of Cornwell's methodology as well.
Yeah, and I think that in particular the first Half-Life game really makes me think of Cornwell as well, of like kind of showing like what if a facility that's running quite well very suddenly goes wrong, and quite typifies actually a adventure for interns kind of in Cornwell, because pretty much every department you're going to go into is going to break and go wrong, so you're going to be facing, but you don't have a heavy duty suit, maybe you don't even have a crowbar like Gordon Freeman to deal with the problem. Like it's you really are the most outgunned and underserved group working for Cornwell for pretty much nothing.
Yeah, it's you are like the least valued and most numerous asset that Cornwell have. And so every department you're in, while it might feel like you're in the cutting edge of something brilliant, you're actually at the lowest rung of a ladder. It's why the alien autopsy you get the aliens that they don't really care about. It's why the asset management units that you deal with, which I think got hinted at a recent update for followers, you have the weirdest monsters that do not have any applicable value kind of anywhere else. They're just very lethal and they don't want to get rid of them yet. And the idea of being sort of in those big cutting edge research facilities and all of those cool things and being kind of the coffee boy is a really fun angle we've kind of we're kind of forcing on people. Yeah, I mean, the other thing I think I'm going to tangent straight into right now is the one that I always get quite a lot, and I kind of respect it because anyone who knows me knows I'm a huge fan of Fallout. Is Vault-Tec, which is the big bads from the Fallout universe, and minor nerd spillage, but originally Vault-Tec were kind of a semi-government facility. They were given government contracts, but they were also like partly involved. And then as the kind of media went on over time, they've kind of separated them. So it's like, no, private institution doing its own research. And it's kind of like this evolution of media literacy where it's like, well, who's the bad guy? Well, the bad guy is the government. Where it's actually, no, the bad guy is the private sort of mega corporation complex. And so Cornwell, we kind of have separated very much from any kind of institution the world over. And you mentioned before about like these facilities where they make mistakes. I was writing a chapter for the novel, which is going to launch alongside the expansion book earlier. And the opening line of the chapter is Cornwell doesn't make mistakes, they make innovations. And it's all about retrospective analysis. And so even when departments go wrong, which I think is in the expansion book, it's all considered part of the plan or profitable in some way. So I think we do that with the HR department, which is like if something goes wrong in HR, that's fine. That's a self-contained ecosystem.
The way I've always thought about the mega corporations, and I think this extends to Vault-Tec. One of the ones that I popped on notes when we were chatting about this is the Outer Worlds as well, which has a very similar vibe of like, instead in space with kind of corporations ruling out there, they all kind of shared this DNA of that. If the corners are falling off of the square, how do you sell it as a circle? Is kind of how I think they approach stuff, and I like that as an idea because it's so grubby and terrible, but it always provides really interesting narrative twists and directions, because ultimately a megacorp or people who are thinking that way, who are in charge of these things and only really see the bottom line, think so differently to kind of how you would normally think about a situation, that it will surprise you and provide these narrative twists, because it is just so terrible. That's the approach, and the main thing is, how can we sell this and turn this into a profitable venture?
it's very much, and I think that's the kind of the cusp of it. It's like it's a society not led by democracy. That it's kind of the fun of it. It's a society led by press release, and it's the weird spins on dystopian scenarios that are taken to an almost comic extreme because of the business jargon, because of the angles and the politics that get brought into it from that kind of perspective. I know with Vault-Tec, they basically developed, so they had so much money, they were just like and doing all these vaults, and they were like, well, let's just come up with an experiment. And so their staff writers of the video games would actually just come up with like, what if it was a vault with a guy named Gary, and it was just him, and he had a cloning vat, and they're like, cool, that's the experiment. And so there is that level of kind of like laissez-faire. What would happen if you had all the money, all of the power, and no responsibility, and the only thing kind of governing your company's direction was your personal whims? And that is pretty much every development that Cornwell is kind of working on in the books. And I think we talked about this. Like one of the big things I remember was there's an adventure, and it's on the satellite research facility, the Pie in the Sky facility. And I had in the adventure teleporters, and I was like, well, you go through the teleporter to the next stage of the adventure, and something weird will happen because it's not good teleportation tech. And you were like, well, maybe it should just be pneumatic tubes, because I feel like someone at Cornwell would just want to see if that worked, and this would be where they'd test it. And immediately kind of I went back and I was like, yeah, it's pneumatic tubes. And we did that. So it's like you get thrown out of these horrible, like you're compressed and fired through the facility. And it's so much more interesting when you're kind of untethered by a kind of like, oh, they would definitely be developing this because of logic. They're developing this because they can.
Yeah.
Who else is on our video game influence list?
So I think an interesting one to kind of look at is from like the player perspective is for me is the Stanley Parable. For those who don't know the Stanley Parable, it is you play a man named Stanley, and you working at your desk one day, and everyone in the office is gone, and there's this very lovely voiceover that's happening that is telling you what's going to happen next. Whether you choose to follow that instruction or not is up to you. So it ultimately becomes a interactive kind of choose your own adventure kind of environment puzzle game, which is absolutely fascinating, but is all shrouded in a lot of office humor and kind of like darkly funny kind of explorations of work life and kind of like what it means to actually exist in these kind of office type spaces and kind of like what your purpose is within work. And I really, really enjoy that. And I think there is some elements of this, of the slight kind of probably existential crisis I imagine a lot of the interns at Cornwell kind of have, of desperately hoping that this is going to lead somewhere, when we know, in a sense of dramatic irony, because we know Cornwell, it's not going to go anywhere because it's Cornwell. And I think that's kind of quite interesting, of just being where you attribute value in your work life, and kind of also how your workplace is value in you, I think as well, which Stanley Parable explores brilliantly. It's one that I think I enjoy a lot and think about a lot when looking at, because to clarify, so I act as like kind of primary editor for the adventures for Cornwell for Adam. When I'm looking at it from a player experience, of like thinking, is there anything we can add or tweak that kind of just takes that element of like feeling worthless to the company that you're working for and turn it to 11. Of, we don't want it to be like you've been passed up for middle management. It's more, you're buried underneath about 5 different asterisks in your contract that actually means that if you don't file the right paperwork on Tuesday, your soul gets sold to the devil. It's that kind of level of kind of disparity of like kind of how we want to kind of exaggerate. I think poor old Stanley, I think really epitomizes that for me, for kind of thinking about the player experience.
I always recommend the Stanley Parable to GMs who want to get more of a player's perspective and figure out what bad GMing is like, because the poor old narrator is desperate for you to just get back to your desk and file paperwork, and the more you kind of pull at the edges of the world and push the wrong doors, it's a really fascinating kind of exploration of the thing we deal with in RPGs. Every time we run one, like the relationship between the player and the GM in a practical sense. I will say the only other video game that really springs to mind for me is and I have to drop it because I feel like contractually obligated to just praise Sam Lake as a video game writer. Is the Remedy kind of universe of Control and the Alan Wake series, because of their ability to kind of like build fantastical worlds that are kind of steeped in real world mythology and history, but entirely crafted into their own unique thing. They're kind of like these perfectly contained ecosystems that you can kind of go and indulge in and be a part of. It's so wonderful, so weird, so dark, but always with a sense of humor. And I think that's definitely something we try, not just with corporate. Although I will say Control and had a lot of like corporate-y ideas floating around in it, which was really fun to explore as well. But like it throughout a lot of what we do in Shiver, I think that kind of mentality of getting the tone right, getting the world right, setting your adventure right, even in something very light-hearted like with Blockbuster, the Shiver Blockbuster sort of expansion we wanted to create these little ecosystem worlds, like 5 different worlds that you can jump in, a fantasy world, a sci-fi world, and they're not directly connected, but each one you can kind of set up for your players and they play through, and that's how they discover their place in the world. And like that is something we always try and do, but definitely with Cornwell, with a contained ecosystem, it's underground, it's in an unfathomable place. And yeah, there's definitely, if you want to experience something like that, Control, Alan Wake, that is definitely where you go. Sorry.
I was going to say, it definitely captures that idea of like building your own facility, doesn't it? Which is something we're wanting to explore kind of more of like this endless rooms upon rooms of weird experiments and departments that feel like they go on forever. It's still contained within like a Cornwall consolidated like facility, but the oldest house, which is the kind of name of the bureau, the kind of house that you're based within in Control, has this very like kind of TARDIS-esque, the inside doesn't make any sense. It can't physically make any sense, but you get so embroiled kind of within it and kind of sink into it so easily and believe it to be something so livable. It becomes kind of like a fascinating thing, but also feels claustrophobic at the same time whilst being able to be expansive. I think that is something that we really want to capture with kind of how you think about the facilities your interns are in, is that almost they are like puzzle trap mazes in a lot of ways. Is that if you think about an internship at Cornwell, it's almost like being in a Saw film style trap house, but all it is being like you get promoted and you go to somewhere else which is just bad and you have to survive it in a different way. It's a kind of interesting rat maze of various different terrible things that are trying to make money off equally terrible things. And Control's interesting because it has a sense of hopefulness to it, with a dark edge of that there are scary and terrifying things in the world that ultimately they're trying to fight and contain using high levels of bureaucracy. Whilst with Cornwall Consolidated, it's more how can we organise that into departments and profit off that with high levels of bureaucracy. So it is as well as an abandonment of all safety protocols for anyone who works there, who's not an executive or above. So yeah, I think for me that's kind of like where my brain goes kind of when we're kind of pulling from Control. It's probably one of my favourite video games of all time, I would say. If you've not played it, go and play it. It's incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a little side note, I think the world of Control is linked to the I've never know how to really refer to it, the open source open world of SCP, which people always come up to us at conventions and talk about. And I think it's something that Charlie and I have always kind of admired from a distance. So SCP is Secure, Contain, Protect, I
Yeah,
think.
that's correct. Yeah.
Which is the narrative world of like finding weird things, putting them in a place, and then kind of securing them, containing, and then they keep them there. But like each one is it's almost like an anthology where anyone can contribute a weird object, creature, strange room transferred from like a beat down hotel, and they will build a story from it, something scary. And I think we've always appreciated, I think there was an SCP style podcast, was that right, that maybe Don't Play was featured on, or was that something else?
Yes, there was. Yes, it was
Yeah,
on the
which was really
bloody
fun.
It was on the bloody Disgusting Network. We collaborated with
Yeah.
them, and they made basically treated Don't Play This Game, which actually I've got props, which I've got here. Treated the entity in the game itself as a SCP, a categorized SCP, which was very
Yeah,
exciting for us.
very
Of
cool.
something kind of that. That's the kind of whole thing with SCP that I find fascinating. It's not just like physical monsters and ghoulies. It can be, you know, a giant jock off crocodile, or it can be something a lot more nebulous, like a mimetic entity that transfers through like speech or ideas, and it means you can kind of move things around and play around with it. There's not many what's the word, restraints, I think, on terms of like what actually can
Yeah,
kind of constitute an SCP.
yeah.
Or I
It's
imagine there are
such an open and
subcategorizations, but it's
unwieldy
very
thing.
open, like I think, for
Yes,
people to
yeah,
play in
yeah.
that sandbox.
Yeah, it's definitely something that a lot of people have brought to us, and we've kind of been fans from the outside. And we've had a few people who have like invested in Shiver specifically because they want to recreate SCP monsters and stories and things, which is absolutely, our system is, you know, designed for you to do all of this weird and unconnected things. Um, One thing I think that we, I mean, I'm not going to speak for you actually, but we did, Charlie and I like to play horror video games together every now and again, and kind of jump in and experience what collaborative video gaming is, and like unique player experiences and things. And one of them, we did dabble in an SCP licensed game. And one thing that I know about it that didn't sit right with us was very serious. It's a very serious horror world, and we can do very serious horror, and we do. I think slasher is, and a lot of gothic is very, you know, serious stuff, but always with a you can still smile and you can still tone it hither and thither. With regards to the similarities between SCP and definitely corporate, again, probably with Cornwell's weird monster division, the asset management kind of departments and their containment units and all the weird things in them, they are definitely much more. We take a much more light-hearted approach. I mean, these things are still, you know, absolutely tearing interns to pieces, and it's a nightmare. But there is that kind of, you know, well, did you hit the missing limb quota today? Kind of undercurrent to it, which is definitely something I think we were very happy to include.
Yeah, it's. I think it's also like it's levels of seriousness, isn't it? With SCP, it's always like kind of very highly trained strike teams dealing with something, and it's like, and Cornwell's got those, to be fair, but
Mm.
also you do have the layers down the thing of where it's been like, shall we see if our interns, who basically are the equivalent of animal control trying to catch raccoon with nets, try and catch a hydra, like and kind of allowing them to try and solve problems whilst being completely under equipped, and label it an experiment.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm,
It's you know, whatever the outcome,
mm,
they're totally happy. They might not even read the report.
mm.
Um, but it is, yeah, we found a lot of humor in that kind of disconnect between how serious the monster could be, but it's not profitable. So like, throw it at the intern, see what's happened. Um, Speaking of kind of like corporate, the uncaring world of corporate hierarchy, I'm gonna pivot. I think I'm gonna pivot to film.
Okay.
if that's all right.
Yeah, sure. Let's go.
Because there is a cornerstone film that I think everyone who is interested in corporate or doesn't know if they're interested in corporate, who is on the fence about maybe horror but wants to try some of the more comedic aspects of it, that everyone can watch. It's a film that is, I think, responsible for a lot of the humor in corporate. It's responsible for a lot of how I turned out as a person. It was probably the first film I ever showed my now fiance, and I think after she watched that, she got a better view of who I am as a human being, and that's Office Space,
Mm.
um, which is one I know that Charlie is also. I think both of us big fans of. Is it Mike Judge? I want to
I
say.
think it's Mike Judge. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's been a
creator of
long
King of
time
the
since I've
Hill.
seen it now. Actually, Office Space, but yeah, but it just fantastically captures the mundanity and also the insanity of a cubicle office. I mean, if people think that like The Office, which I think definitely like has some DNA bleeds in, like kind of from all the kind of TV series, both Brits and the US one, but I'd say Office Space very much sits above that as something much darker, because it's not just the minor look to camera being like, oh, these guys are a bit crazy. It's more of being, you know, if you if somebody thinks that you're stealing his stapler, like he might go postal and burn the office down. He is my favorite character, by the way, and why I love
Yeah,
putting staplers as weapons in the game. It's why it's in the corporate risers one instantly is having your stapler, because you must save your precious stapler. Oh yeah,
yeah, Milton.
Milton. That's
Milton.
it.
How far can you push an employee before he snaps?
Yeah, 'cause it's
Is
Stephen
one of the
Root who
joys of
plays him,
Office
isn't it?
Space.
Yeah, I
It
love
is.
Stephen
It
Root. He's
is.
so good. Yeah.
It's such a fantastic film.
Mm.
And it's got Stephen Root. It's got John C. McGinley. Um, I always forget who plays the middle manager, and it's the middle manager that I think formed a lot of what the dialogue that we write for GMs to kind of set tone
Mm.
for Cornwall will be, which is he's in the film he's called Lumberg, which is a great
Mm.
name for a sorry if there are any Lumbergs out there, for a terrible middle manager. And Lumberg doesn't do anything in the movie. He doesn't do anything for the company. He is the person in charge of the main character and his friends, and he walks around with a coffee cup with a terrible slogan on it. And he takes a sip and he says, yeah, and that's about it. And he's constantly asking for TPS reports, which are pointless progress reports that they have to fill. And the film really takes a joy at picking apart a very real world that everyone kind of can associate with. Anyone who's worked in an office, especially as I mean, we worked in post production, which was an office. We could glamorize it and say we got to work on really fun TV shows. We didn't. It was an office job.
Yeah, that's
You know,
that's the fun TV show bit is the bit we put on our CVs to try and get a job to get out of that office. And that and who owned that office will not be named, but I think that environment as well. Just for context, so me and Adam worked in post production together for nearly a couple of years in London, and because of the nature of the stuff that we were working on, we were either in a room with no windows or semi-sunk into a basement, harsh fluorescent lights, white walls, individual cubicles, computers, no accoutrements allowed on your desk, very stringent rules, and it was just soul crushing as an experience. And hilariously, because I'm probably at a point where I couldn't be reprimanded for it now, where the vast majority of the core system for Shiver was written by me on hours where people weren't watching me, was in that hellscape of an office to try and keep myself sane. So yes, awful Office Space environment. But hilariously, I think I saw Office Space before we had that job, and I feel like I need to revisit Office Space now, having lived more of a corporate stained life.
Yeah.
Is what I would say, because I think it will hit home. I think it hit home well at the time, because you meet these kind of characters, these corporate stooge characters in life, wherever you go. And I think you recognize them, whether it's in education or in, or whether you're retail, whatever workplace you find yourself up in, you find these kind of characters who ultimately will boss you around, ask for pointless things, and ultimately you regularly ask the question to yourself, what do they actually do? And it's those kinds of characters who are hilarious to write. I find like they're great fun to write, and they are just such great villains because they are so easy, I think, for people to get on board with getting annoyed at and disliking, and finding antagonism with, because we encounter them all the time. And Lumbergh is one of those in Office Space, big time. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Lumbergh is the quintessential version. I would absolutely recommend to everyone to watch this film. It is wonderful. As a side note, there is a subplot in the film which is also weirdly prescient to our lives, which is one of the characters ends up in a big accident and has a lawsuit, and as a result, he no longer has to work for the company anymore. And he's kind of battered and bruised. And I lost my job in post-production. I think you kind of like jumped angle.
I Dark Souls dodged rolled because I heard executives talking about contracts when I probably shouldn't have done.
And I basically spent the last 2 months as managers were leaving and staff were leaving and everything was getting insane. I was like, all right, well, my manager's manager was like, just help me out. And I was like, all right, so I'll help out. And I was doing more and I was doing this. And then we were going to get transferred to a new place, and everyone got a fun little transfer meeting where they got all their brief. And on my transfer meeting, they turned to me and said, be grateful for the time that you spent here. And if you tell anyone otherwise, they won't believe you. And I thought, that's not what you're supposed to say. And I found out the last day that I wasn't being transferred. They just didn't want me to leave before that point. I was being fired. So I was really beaten down after that. So the guy in this movie who gets injured, he is literally beaten down. His legs broken, in a wheelchair. I think his arms are broken, like he's in one of those full body casts. And he is absolutely over the moon because with his lawsuit settlement, he's going to move into game design and specifically family board game design. Which he makes a game called Jump to Conclusions, which is always locked in my head because it's one of those puns that we would absolutely put in a game somewhere. And it's like a debate game, but with Twister involved. It's weird. But like that is something that we found from a lot of people who used to work. There are a lot of people in independent game design in the UK who, if you talk to them about their old job, I don't want to mention people by name, but I know someone Charlie and I are very close with who used to be literally a programmer like they are in the movie, and he pivoted to game design, and like that's it. There's so many of us that have kind of washed up from corporate office work and onto the shores of game design, and it was weird that even Office Space kind of grasped that in a way. It's like, what is the antithesis of working in these environments? Well, it's making board games.
Yeah, a lot of people from education too have washed up on those shores, but I would argue that's because education in the UK, not to get too political, is now landing very much in that same heavily bureaucratic space as a lot of corporate jobs are. And I think
a lot of what we discussed, isn't it? We discuss in our book as we put into the Cornwell world of these kind of like layers of bureaucracy and how they can kind of chokehold the different areas. And it's worth noting actually that our Cornwell heads don't subject themselves to that. It's all the layers below, and it's deliberately put in to kind of keep everyone in place, which is the fun thing. But no, the other thing about Office Space, I will say before we move on, go watch it. It also features a wonderful performance by John C. McGinley. There's a reason I'm specifically naming him here, but he plays a character who is, I actually had to write down, I had to go on the Wikipedia before this meeting and write down his job title, which is a corporate efficiency consultant, which is the kind of job title I've been making up for Cornwell. But it is, that's a real thing. He's paid to go and consult on efficiency and probably makes a lot of money from it. And he rewards the main character, who is now not giving any effort at work, with he tells him he's got management potential because he's now the most incompetent he's ever been. He's stopped caring about his job, and that's when he has management potential. It's one of the best scenes in the film. I think it's a popular meme. that is what you will know the film from. The important thing about John C. McGinley, why I'm naming him here, is because he's in our second influential film that we're going to talk about, which is the Belko Experiment.
Yeah, I absolutely love the Belko Experiment. Again, another one I've not watched in a while, and all this is doing is making me want to go and revisit a bunch of things. But yeah, the Belko Experiment, I think, takes that humour that we've kind of got with Office Space, of what we've been talking about, and pushes it into, okay, so what if you take these characters and you actually take them out of make the world less realistic and push them into a more extreme scenario. So the Belko Experiment is people working in a fancy office block, and then the metal shutters itself in, and basically they start receiving commands to basically reduce the office population by a certain amount at a certain by a certain time, which then leads to factionalization. It leads to people fighting, using office stuff as weaponry, and it is this very interesting thing of like, I think work relationships are kind of quite strange. I mean, ours I think are very unique because, like, in Parable, because for a lot of us we've known each other for a very long time. It's very casual, but like in a office environment, it's kind of, you chat, you make kind of small talk, but not everyone kind of is your friend necessarily. Or it's a very specific type of relationship that is extremely difficult to codify. I think in the UK, for sure, I'd imagine for the Americans it's similar, and around the world I imagine it's quite similar. But we just don't really have the kind of specific language for it sometimes. But it's kind of what happens when you take this group of associates that you have very kind of stilted interactions with and relationships with, and are thrust into a survival scenario, which is ultimately what the Belko Experiment is. There's another great film that I won't delve into too much, which stars Stephen Yeun and I always forget her name, Australian actress. She's in the Scream.
Scream 6. She's in
she's in
a hide and seek film. Ready or Not.
Ready or Not, yeah. It'll come to me in a moment. But they co-star together of basically a rage virus zombie film where people still maintain a lot of their cognizance, and this film's called Mayhem, and it's basically a bunch of people in an office block going absolutely crazy and killing one another, which is great fun.
I enjoy Mayhem. It's the thing about Mayhem is they kind of incapacitate people because they establish a moral ground in the film that people are still people. So that when they're going around, they definitely grievously wound a lot of people, but very few people die.
Yeah.
And I can't remember. He gets fired, and his one thing is he just wants, I don't know if he wants to talk to someone in charge. He wants something, and then they basically accidentally kill his friend, and then everything escalates. And it's not really a rage virus. It removes their inhibition. I think that's how the film puts it. So that the impulse of the person who shares a desk with me, I hate him. I wish I could punch him in the face. Then they just punch him in the face.
Yeah.
And so there is this immediate office therapy, is that people are just doing the thing that they say, that they remove that part of their brain that has this weird office conduct.
Yeah.
Because it's different than anything else. I was just thinking when you're talking, you're friends with them because you have the same job. You're work friends. And it's not the same. Some people will compare it to but your school friends are they're like that. You're just friends because you're in the same geographical space. I don't think that's true. I think school friends are like prison friends. I think you've been through something and it bonds you. Whereas in an office space, you have all of these inhibitions. You have a code of conduct, and you literally a code of conduct. And you go through, and you're like, well, we're gonna go in hell, but I'm gonna put up as many barriers as I can around me to kind of none of this is connecting.
Yeah. Because I think those two films are a really good pairing of that. For me, the Belko Experiment is by putting people in an extreme survival scenario where the politics and structure of that code of conduct, where that code of conduct leads to extremity, and then Mayhem is what everybody actually wants to do in that office when the code of conduct is removed. So they're actually a beautiful mirror of one another that are cathartic in both ways. which is really, really interesting. I said as a little side one that I'll put in there that splinters off that I think it's a horror film that doesn't get enough love. It's a British horror film starring one of our all-time greats, Danny Dyer, amongst others, a myriad of great British character actors. Is Severance, which is a film about a company basically team building retreat, which has been basically misbooked, and they end up in a targeted by almost like survivalist hillbillies, if I'm remembering it correctly. But just it is filled with a lot of very dark, very British humor about the workplace, combined with, you know, if you blended it with Wrong Turn. That is kind of how I would put it, and it's one that because I think it was like mid 2000s, like 2005, 2007, and it's one that it's a relatively low budget, but like it's one that's been slept on, and that one actually I think sits like in a really interesting place with those, because it's survival with your co-workers, but it kind of shows the relationships that kind of can be more positive that are there as well as the negative. It has more of a broad spread rather than like the workplace is just awful. It's more it's more the workplace and the relationships are more complicated, and I think
they've
which is
taken them
fascinating.
out of the office and they're on this sort of forced team building, which if anyone has ever been on a team building exercise, you can kind of appreciate it, because it puts you in a really weird circumstance where you're like, you're still on the clock. There are still expectations of you to behave, but you're now out of your kind of theater, if you know what I mean.
Building a bridge out of fucking toilet rolls, like with three people you don't know. It's
three people that you like. You look at your monitor to avoid talking to sometimes. Like it's the collaboration of it is insane. I mean, Parable, very different, not least because, you know, two of us are brothers, but also because a lot of us work from home and our interactions are different with friends. But ultimately we did our team building exercise, which was building don't play artifacts and boxes. Very different to what went down in Severance, we'll say. But Severance it was a straight to DVD film, I think. Might have had a very limited release. I think they were hoping for a Shaun of the Dead that didn't really translate, but it is a really fun film if you can stomach a lot of practical
gore
effects.
And just to clarify, because it's actually on our influence list as well slightly, because I'm not sure if you've seen it, Adam, but there is obviously the new TV show Severance that's been out for a while on Apple, which I've watched half of season 1. I really like it. It's definitely... It has more of a slower, creepier pace, I would say, than the kind of slight zaniness of Cornwell has. But definitely has the sinister kind of office environment to it. That is the actual physical office space itself as a prison, I would kind of say, for the TV show. But please check them both out, but please check out the Severance film, because I think it's one that people don't know that much about. We got a big up British indie cinema, really, don't we? Like, we can't really help it. Yeah.
You got to plug what little we have.
Yeah.
You know. But the Severance TV show is one that got mentioned quite a bit when we were floating some of the artwork from corporate. I don't even think it was the artwork; it was just the concept. And speaking of which, we have some questions from people. So before any further pivots, someone asked us how do you define corporate horror? And I think the two answers to that question, the obvious answer is kind of, we're doing horror stories in the workplace. Which I remember when I pitched it like that to Matt, who is our latest Parable who has washed up on the shores, our new director. He was like, so there's comedy in it, and like he got that connection immediately. The other way of looking at it is it's kind of these horror stories of what happens when corporate influence is uninhibited, when there is this complete disconnect almost from the reality of the outside. We've talked before about these self-contained ecosystems and being like almost like a prison. and the effect it has on the people they're in. Because the interns, they're working for this, they have no power. They live here, they eat here, they are charged for infractions, and they don't make a paycheck. So it is an endless cycle, and so that in itself is corporate horror. It is that kind of, what if the big powerful company and you were inside the belly of the beast. And with that sense of humor of everything is kind of taken with its own special jargon, and there's its own bureaucracy to fulfill. So for instance, I think the most corporate horror story, that the one that really sums it up really well, outside of the quick start, which has you exploring Cornwell's supply office, which it turns out is, spoiler alert, a portal to a hell dimension that also just happens to be an office that shares the same kind of interplanar space with Cornwell. And you just take their staplers and pens and pencils to keep the margins. Then the other one that I think really sums it up is that for whatever reason, your interns are being disciplined. This is the setup of the story. They are being sent to HR to get a stamp on their form that essentially says they have completed, I can't even remember what we call it. It's their code of conduct realignment or something.
Yeah.
And when they get to HR, oh dear, HR has devolved into a post-apocalyptic wasteland because of bureaucratical infighting. And they have to kind of get this stamp because they can't leave the floor and go back to work without getting the stamp. And you have to kind of navigate this Game of Thrones-esque civil war between a bunch of people who basically believe in the same 10 codes of conduct, which are highly self-contradictory, and they just have different interpretations of how they should be done. And so you navigate this weird post-apocalyptic bureaucratical battle.
It's like
that's corporate horror.
It's like Mad Max Thunderdome meets Game of Thrones politics with a lot more ties, staplers, and paperwork to fill out. Is kind of how I would describe it.
We have the debate dome in there. Safety Squirrel teaches your players how to utilize office supplies and furniture into post-apocalyptic weaponry of varying quality. And because it's Shiver, you have an entire faction who are dedicated to the eldritch god of order, which is Regulagoroth, the god of regulation. And they're the Pizza Party Police because that's their motivational force. And so you have all of these things that you can take that people know from the real life world of working for these kind of big faceless corporations, and we put that in a way that makes it funny, that makes it playable, and for me has felt a lot like therapy. Except no one's paying me to do therapy, but people do pay me to write this, and that's how I see corporate horror. It's a fun way of reframing your really mundane work environment sometimes.
Yeah, for me, it's a cathartic release of all the things that frustrate you about the very much like the 9-to-5 world of work, dialed up to 11 and in extreme ways, so you can basically punch it in the face, or scream it as hard as you can. And I think obviously with how work is and how kind of corporate environments are, they are so stifling. There is no room for expression or kind of even confrontation a lot of the times, in order to kind of actually just kind of have that moment where you can kind of have that release of like kind of whatever is frustrating you, because it's just kind of so heavily layered. And I think the only way we can find kind of catharsis in that, kind of through this, is fiction. For me, kind of what corporate horror is making that corporate world so horrible and so terrifying, that ultimately fighting against stuff that is at that exaggerated point provides some release for having to face, your middle manager Bob, who's going to lean on your cubicle and talk at you for 40 minutes about nothing, and then ask why you haven't got something in on time, despite having to listen to him for 45 minutes. But we can take that, and we can take Bob and make him a hell demon that sucks your soul and also gives you paperwork, and exaggerate that and then you can hit him with a stapler, and it gives you a different kind of release. And I think that's what it's all about. It's finding cathartic release about the workplace that you kind of have or have had in the past, and by exploring it through extremes, through horror, through fantastical elements, finding some element of kind of closure and fun in the things that are not enjoyable about the workplace.
Yes, absolutely. Which is horror in a nutshell. You find your real life anxieties, and then you find a way to confront them in a safe space. But with this, it's the ever crushing. I think when we were talking, I was talking to Barney about Barney Menzies, the other parable brother. I was talking to him about, like, he was like, oh, what inspires corporate? What would you say in a nutshell when he was wanting a press release for something? And I was like, it's for people who are afraid of going outside, for the general state of the world. And there is a layer of that where it's like, if those anxieties kind of come through in the work and they are dealt with in a way that is fun. I think corporate is launching at probably the best time for it in human history, maybe the worst time in human history, but or up there. But yeah, absolutely. And we've talked a bit. We're very happy to join the pantheon of very sinister organizations like Weyland-Yutani, Vault-Tec, Aperture Science. What's the one from RoboCop?
Oh, it's the big C.
It's a really simple name.
It's like the very geometric C.
Consumer.
I can never remember it.
That's
But no,
probably,
RoboCop.
yeah.
But yeah, I think it is. It's very prescient, isn't it, of where actual mega corporations are now starting to have some elements of it. Kind of there.
It was really frustrating when I was writing the installments. Where I would come up with something that sounded really horrible and outlandish, and then within a month, there would be a news story that mirrored it. So I think I can't give too much away about what's going to be in the book, really, because we've got a few weeks left, more than a few weeks. I think we've got about 10 weeks, so there'll be more reveals as we go. But one of the things was essentially, as a side joke, was Cornwell trying to brand the word food, so that they could use the word food and it didn't have to mean that this thing was nutritional or even edible. And it definitely didn't mean that it couldn't be sentient. And I remember reading that a company tried to patent and redesign the word nutritional so that they could get away with marketing their food for families and children specifically, so that they could say it was nutritional. And they were like, actually, that's our branded corporate term. And it's I was ahead of the curve by a few weeks. But in a world where those anxieties are real, it's fun to have a way to kind of play with them. And this is actually another question someone asked: is if you buy this book, do you have to play as Cornwell? Like with, I think the answer, like all Shiver things, the answer is no. We give you Cornwell as an entity that you can use, set all your adventures in, play with. If you want to take the HR adventure and set it in your own company, really easy to do. If you want to make your own company but kind of use the Cornwell framework of how their research facilities are that we outline in the book, really easy to do. If you don't want to do corporate horror, but you like, each adventure in Cornwell is going to have new mechanics that lead into the weird science of it that we were talking about earlier with the portal influences, and you can take those new mechanics and apply them elsewhere. So, for instance, little sneak peek, Severance mechanic, which appears in one of our stories, and it's not about being dismissed with pay. It's about decapitating your enemies. And you could take that mechanical system and apply it to your zombie apocalypse story like that. And so it's while we are setting things in the world of Cornwell and we're reflecting reality in some ways as we see it and satirizing the workplace, you can take all of those elements, as always with Shiver, bits that you like and bits that you don't, you can leave. So yeah, that's still very much our priority, is giving you more tools to play with.
Yeah, it's kind of embracing the modularity of kind of Shiver as a system. I think it's always been really important to us in terms of kind of how can you take something, enjoy what we're kind of putting in front of you in terms of like the actual subgenre we're exploring, but then also make sure there are tools and new things there that can jump into other genres and enrich your games further. Because ultimately, it still boils down to us. We want you to make your own horror movies and have a hell of a time doing it, and making sure you've got the tools to do that and to lop zombies' heads off is something we're really excited for. And there are also so many more absolutely mental mechanics in this book that I can't wait for us to chat about a little bit more, but we can't do it yet as it is only our first stream talking about it so far. But yeah, so we've been going for over an hour, Adam, already. So yeah, and we haven't even touched upon TV and books, really. But I mean, I guess our decision point really now is because our original plan was to only really kind of talk for an hour, but in the typical way, we've got through maybe a fifth of our bullet list of stuff we were going to talk about, which is common for me and Adam in general, because we tangent like crazy. But if this is something you've enjoyed and you'd like us to do another one of these, let us know, because I think there are definitely more influences and inspirations like we'd be happy to talk about. Like if not, I think one of the things that we could do is we'll make a little graphic and give you some make sure we're tagging all of the recommendations that we're talking about, so you can kind of dive into some movies, dive into some games and TV and books, and kind of get yourself like prepared for Cornwell. Like if corporate horror is sounding like something you want to kind of get into and you're really interested in, then yeah, let us be your guides, and we'll happily chat more about kind of the things that influence us and tickle our brains, kind of in a good way, when it comes to corporate horror. But yeah, I think, is there anything else we kind of need to cover on our stream for today, Adam? Do you think?
No, I think the one thing I kind of wanted to mention, and there's no way to neatly segue into it, is that like in terms of Cornwell as a brand entity, I know we've been talking, and this is a complete sneak peek. One of the upper tiers of our kind of backing, because this is the first Shiver campaign, I think, where we're launching one book, which is one expansion book. We're launching our first ever written novel with it, but it's only one game book. Yeah, usually it's always two. So, but we are playing around with some extra stuff, which we're going to get to over the coming weeks. But one thing is talking about all of these wonderful companies with their wonderful branding, wonderful, horrible companies. We are, Apple not included, because we did name drop them, and I feel like they won't be happy that they're in this conversation at all. But watch Severance. No. We are looking at doing Cornwell branded merch. So if you have any idea, if you would like a Cornwell baseball cap, if you would like a Cornwell mug, if you would like a Cornwell A5 guide to workplace safety, please let us know what you would like to see in that kind of little Cornwell company merch pack, and we will absolutely look at that.
Yeah, because ultimately we want everyone to feel like they're part of the Cornwell Consolidated family. I have some other things I've been doing for Adam is preparing for our Epic game as well, which is going to be at UK Games Expo. Not this week, next week. Will be. Oh no! Jesus Christ! I've forgotten the date for UKGE. My brain.
It's 2 weeks. 2 weeks today.
In 2 weeks today. The date actually being. 30th
of May.
30th of May. Yes, we'll be at UKG for the entire weekend, but the Epic game itself is on the 30th. Unfortunately, we are completely sold out, I believe, aren't we, Adam?
Yeah.
We are indeed.
Yes. Yeah. We have sold out. All 50 odd tickets are gone. I don't know if we'll be expanding beyond that, because I will have to train and brief new GMs, but it's an entirely new adventure we're running. It's called the Recruitment Gauntlet, and it is the process that all Cornwell interns will have to go through, whether or not they remember it, before joining any of Cornwell's research facilities.
Yes, and it's going to be bloody, is what I will say, as only one team will win a coveted internship. The others win death. That is what they shall receive. So yes, so we will be there. We will be at UKGE. If you want to know more about corporate, obviously jump onto Backkit. Give our launch party a follow. We'll be if you're following there, you'll get more streams. There's also a free quick start where we've put one of the adventures, the one that Adam mentioned, Synergy, where it is raiding the corporate supply closets of hell. If you want to kind of get a sense of what Shiver Corporate is like, dive on there, have a little look, see what you think. We'll definitely be talking about the quick start and some of the other things kind of associated with the project a lot more as we kind of move forwards. But yeah, kind of watch this space, and if you have any questions, have any suggestions, or anything you'd like to see on this new kind of stream format from us, please let us know. But yeah, any last words, Adam?
No, I hope everyone has a good weekend and doesn't feel too bad about going back to their own corporate horror on Monday.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all for watching. Cornwall Consolidated thanks you for your viewing, and we will see you all very, very soon. Goodbye.
Bye.